Growing up, I was always the problem child, the disappointment, the one who couldn't seem to do anything right. My brother Ryan was the football star with the perfect grades. My sister Melissa was the artistic prodigy headed for Juilliard. And me? I was just poor decision-making Mason, the family black sheep. Mason, my father would say, shaking his head after another parent-teacher conference, why can't you just get it together like your siblings? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. For years, I believed what they said about me. I internalized every disappointed sigh, every comparison, every subtle suggestion that I was somehow less. But here's the thing about black sheep. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right pasture. And sometimes, when they finally find it, they build a life so extraordinarily bright that the very people who once looked away can't stop staring. This is that story. The Anderson family Christmas photo of 2008 tells you everything you need to know about where I stood. My father, Thomas, the distinguished orthopedic surgeon, stands tall in a perfectly tailored suit. My mother, Eleanor, with her university dean's posture, sits elegantly in front. Ryan and Melissa flank them on either side. Ryan already 6'2" at 17, Letterman jacket subtly visible, Melissa's ballet-trained posture making her look like she'd stepped out of a different world entirely. And then there's me. 15. Years old, awkwardly positioned slightly apart from the group, hair too long, tie slightly crooked despite my mother's aggressive adjustments moments before. If you look closely, you can see my fingers forming devil horns behind Ryan's head. A juvenile act of rebellion that would earn me a week without video games once the photos were developed. "Mason, for God's sake," my mother had hissed when she saw it. "Just once, couldn't you take something seriously?" That photo lived on our mantelpiece for years, a daily reminder of who I wasn't. The Anderson family legend was written long before I came along. My grandfather had built a regional department store empire from nothing. My father had escaped the family business to become one of Boston's most respected surgeons. My mother had worked her way up to academic dean at Lakeside Prep, the same exclusive private school we all attended. Excellence wasn't requested in our household. It was the baseline expectation. Ryan fulfilled those expectations effortlessly. 4 years my senior, he moved through the world with a golden boy ease that seemed almost supernatural to me. Captain of both the football and debate teams, he was already fielding calls from Ivy League recruiters by junior year. Adults spoke to him like he was one of them, not some nuisance child to be managed. Melissa, 2 years older than me, carried our mother's grace and our father's intensity in perfect measure. Her paintings had been displayed in real galleries by age 14. When she played cello, even I, who normally couldn't sit still for more than 10 consecutive minutes, would find myself transfixed, wondering how such sounds could come from human hands. And then there was me. The ADHD diagnosis came when I was 8, though it didn't explain everything. I wasn't just fidgety and distracted. I questioned everything, challenged everyone, and seemed pathologically incapable of doing things the prescribed way. My father called it oppositional, my mother called it difficult, my teachers called it underachieving, and Ryan, never one to waste words, simply called me the screw-up. "Mr. Anderson," my 10th grade history teacher said during yet another after-school parent conference, "Mason is incredibly bright. His test scores prove that, but he doesn't apply himself," my father finished for her with the weary tone of someone who'd heard this exact speech dozens of times before. "He doesn't turn in assignments. He disrupts class. He seems determined to sabotage his own potential." I sat slumped in the too small chair, drawing interconnected mazes on my notebook, pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. He drew a historically accurate but completely inappropriate cartoon of the Boston Massacre on the back of his midterm, Mrs. Winters continued, sliding the offending document across her desk. My father glanced at it, his face doing that thing where it hardened into a mask I couldn't read. "Is that Ted Cruz as King George?" "I thought it was funnier that way," I mumbled. The silence that followed was your typical Anderson family speciality, heavy with disappointment but never quite exploding into the honest release of actual anger. That wasn't our way. The Andersons didn't shout. They just expected better. "We'll discuss this at home," my father said, which was code for, I would receive a lengthy, carefully modulated lecture about wasted potential and family reputation, while Ryan practiced quarterback drills in the backyard and Melissa composed award-winning music upstairs. It was during the car ride home that my father dropped the bomb. "Your mother and I have been discussing alternatives for your education." My stomach clenched. "What does that mean?" "It means Lakeside clearly isn't working for you. Or perhaps more accurately, you're choosing not to work with Lakeside." "You're pulling me out. Where would I even go?" Public school seemed unthinkable for an Anderson. Westridge Military Academy has an excellent program for boys who need additional structure. Military school? The ultimate threat had finally materialized. I stared out the window, watching familiar neighborhoods blur past, fighting the hot pressure building behind my eyes. Is that what I am to you? A problem that needs to be shipped away and fixed? Mason. My father's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This isn't about punishing you. This is about finding an environment where you might actually thrive instead of constantly sabotaging yourself. Ryan and Melissa got to thrive at Lakeside. Ryan and Melissa worked with the opportunities they were given. I bit back the response I wanted to give, that Ryan and Melissa had been given opportunities tailored to who they already were, while I was being asked to contort myself into someone else entirely. That evening, our house hummed with its usual, choreographed perfection. My mother prepared coq au vin while discussing faculty politics with my father. Ryan called from Penn State, where he was already crushing his pre-med courses. Melissa practiced Dvorak upstairs, the notes floating down like they belonged in a different house entirely, one where people actually saw each other. I sat at the kitchen counter, half-heartedly completing calculus problems while watching my parents move around each other with practiced efficiency. "I don't want to go to military school," I said finally. My mother looked up from chopping time, her face softening slightly. It was the look she reserved for particularly troubled students. At Lakeside, compassionate but firm. "We're exploring options, Mason. Your father and I want what's best for you. How do you know what's best for me when you've never actually asked me what I want?" "We've asked," my father said, not looking up from uncorking the wine. "You've just never had much of an answer beyond, 'not this.'" He wasn't entirely wrong. I knew who I wasn't. I wasn't Ryan with his effortless athleticism and academic focus. I wasn't Melissa with her artistic genius. But who was I? What did Mason Anderson actually want? I had no idea. The next day at school, I ducked into Mr. Kaplan's classroom during lunch. Unlike most Lakeside teachers who viewed me as a disruption to be managed, Dave Kaplan, who taught computer science and ran the school's fledgling coding club, actually seemed to enjoy my company. "Hey, troublemaker," he said, not looking up from his keyboard. "Hiding from the cafeteria social hierarchy?" Something like that. I dropped into the chair beside his desk. "Also, I might be getting sent to military school, so I'm making the rounds to say goodbye to the 3 people at Lakeside who don't actively hate me." That got his attention. He swiveled to face me, pushing his perpetually smudged glasses up. His nose. "Military school? That seems incompatible with your particular brand of creative chaos. Tell that to my parents." Mr. Kaplan studied me for a moment. "Have you shown them your game yet?" I shrugged. Why would they care about some stupid game? The stupid game in question was something I'd been building in Mr. Kaplan's coding club for the past 6 months. Unlike the assigned projects that bored me to tears, this one had captured my attention completely. A narrative adventure game that combined history, mythology, and more than a little of my subversive sense of humor. Because, Mason, it shows something they need to see, that when you actually care about something, you're capable of sustained, focused work. That game has more complex coding than most college freshman projects I've seen. I picked at a loose thread on my uniform blazer. They're not interested in games. They're interested in grades and college applications and things that make the Anderson family look good at cocktail parties. So make it look good. Enter it in the state STEM competition. If it places, that gives you leverage. Since when do you advocate for leveraging parents? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Mr. Kaplan smiled. Since I realized some parents need to be shown, rather than told who their children actually are. That afternoon, instead of going home to face another dinner of thinly veiled disappointment, I stayed in the computer lab, working feverishly on my game. What had started as a way to amuse myself had evolved into something more complex. A multi-layered narrative where historical figures found themselves navigating modern moral dilemmas. It was weird, and probably too intellectual for most of my peers, but it was the first thing I'd ever created that felt entirely mine. By the time the janitor kicked me out at 7 p.m., I'd finished enough to feel confident submitting it to the Massachusetts Young Developers Competition. Mr. Kaplan helped me with the application, and for the first time in recent memory, I felt a flutter of something dangerously close to hope. That hope lasted exactly 12 minutes into dinner. "We've made a decision," my father announced as we sat around our immaculate dining table. "Mason will finish the semester at Lakeside, and if there's no significant improvement, he'll transfer to Westridge for spring term." My mother nodded, her expression suggesting this compromise had been her contribution. "This gives you one last chance to demonstrate you can succeed in a traditional academic environment." I pushed my food around my plate, appetite vanishing. "And if I don't want to go?" "You're 16, my father said simply. "This isn't actually a negotiation." Melissa glanced between us, then carefully set down her fork. "Dad, don't you think—" "Melissa, this doesn't concern you," our mother cut in smoothly. I caught my sister's eye across the table. Despite our differences, Melissa had always been the one family member who occasionally stepped in as my defender. Not that it ever changed the outcome. "I submitted a project to the state STEM competition," I said, the words tumbling out before I could reconsider. "It's a historical narrative game I've been coding. Mr. Kaplan says it's good enough to place." The silence that followed wasn't the usual disappointed one. This was different, confused, as if I'd suddenly started speaking a language they didn't understand. "You've been coding?" my father asked finally. "Since when?" "Since last year. I joined Mr. Kaplan's club." "You never mentioned this," my mother said, sounding almost accusatory. "You never asked." Another silence, this one tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. "Well," my father said finally, "that's good initiative, I suppose. Though I'm not sure how a game competition factors into improving your academic standing." And just like that, the momentary bridge disappeared. Whatever I'd expected, interest, maybe, or even just basic curiosity about this thing I'd poured hundreds of hours into, clearly wasn't coming. "Right," I said, pushing back from the table. Forgot for a second that unless I'm following the Ryan-Melissa blueprint, it doesn't count. "Mason, that's not what your father—" my mother began. "Isn't it, though?" I stood up, suddenly unable to sit through another minute of careful Anderson family dynamics. "You know what? Send me to military school. At least there, everyone's upfront about wanting to hammer you into a specific shape." I spent that night coding until my eyes burned, fueled by a complicated mixture of anger and determination. The game, which I'd named Temporal Disruption, became my obsession over the next few weeks. Every free moment went into perfecting it, adding layers and challenges that reflected my increasingly sophisticated understanding of both coding and historical narrative. Mr. Kaplan helped where he could, but increasingly found himself watching from the sidelines. "You've blown past what I can teach you," he admitted 3 weeks before the competition deadline. "You're operating at a level that's genuinely impressive, Mason. For someone who'd heard variations of not living up to potential his entire life." Those words hit with unexpected force. "You really think it has a chance?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I think it has more than a chance." He leaned back in his chair. "The question is, what are you hoping happens if you win?" I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. "I guess I want them to see me. Actually see me. Not just the ways I'm failing to be Ryan or Melissa." Mr. Kaplan nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable want, Mason. Just prepare yourself for the possibility that people sometimes see what they're determined to see, regardless of evidence to the contrary." The wisdom of that warning became clear the evening before the competition. I'd been so focused on finishing my entry that I'd let my other schoolwork slide even further than usual. The resulting midterm progress report that arrived in my parents' email was, to put it mildly, catastrophic. A D- in English literature? My father's voice carried that dangerous calm that was worse than shouting. 2 Fs in history and chemistry? Mason, we had an agreement. "I've been working on my game," I said, knowing how pathetic it sounded even as the words left my mouth. "The competition is tomorrow. After that, I can catch up." This isn't about catching up anymore. This is about a pattern of behavior that demonstrates a fundamental lack of respect for your education and your future. The game is part of my future. It's the first thing I've ever been good at. My mother rubbed her temples, her academic administrator mask slipping to reveal genuine exhaustion. "Mason, playing video games isn't a future. It's a distraction that's clearly keeping you from focusing on what matters." "I'm not playing games, I'm creating one. There's a difference." "Not to your GPA, there isn't," my father said flatly. "You won't be attending this competition. You'll be spending the weekend with a tutor trying to salvage what's left of your academic standing." The familiar heat of injustice burned through me. "You can't do that. I've registered. People are expecting my entry." "You should have thought of that before letting your grades collapse." "This is the one thing that matters to me," I said, hating the way my voice cracked. "The one thing I've actually worked hard at. Please." My father's expression didn't change. "The decision is made, Mason. This is the consequence of your choices." I looked to my mother, hoping for an intervention, but her face showed only tired agreement. The united front, as always. I turned and walked out without another word, letting the door slam behind me with a force that rattled the carefully hung family photos in the hallway. Instead of going to my room, I walked. Aimlessly at first, then, with growing purpose as a plan began to form. I texted Mr. Kaplan, explaining the situation and asking if he could help with a workaround. His response was immediate and not what I expected. "Come to my apartment. Bring your laptop and project. Files. We'll figure something out." By midnight, huddled in Mr. Kaplan's cluttered living room, we had a solution. He would take my finished game to the competition, register it remotely in my name, and handle the technical demonstration portion. It wasn't ideal. I'd wanted to present it myself, but it was better than having months of work go to waste. "Your parents will find out," he warned, refilling my mug with hot chocolate. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the military academy brochure I'd found on my father's desk that morning. What more can they do to me at this point? His expression turned serious. "Mason, I'm willing to help you because I believe in your talent. But I need you to understand something. This defiance only works if you're willing to back it up with consistent effort. One competition win doesn't build a life." "I know," I said. Though in truth, I hadn't thought much beyond the immediate satisfaction of proving my parents wrong. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're not that different from your siblings. They channel their intensity into paths your parents value. You channel yours into rebellion. But it's all still about them, isn't it? His words hit with unexpected precision. I stared into my cooling chocolate, suddenly unsure. I don't want it to be, I said finally. I want to build something that's about me. Mr. Kaplan nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. Then let's make sure your game gets its shot. And after that, we'll talk about what comes next. I returned home at dawn to find my parents waiting, white-faced with worry and fury. The resulting argument was nuclear by Anderson standards, culminating in my father actually raising his voice, a first in family history. This is exactly the impulsive, self-destructive behavior that's been holding you back, he thundered. Sneaking out all night? Involving a teacher in directly defying our instructions? Dave Kaplan sees something in me that you don't, I shot back. He actually bothered to notice what I care about. What you care about is getting your way. Consequences be damned. He wasn't entirely wrong, which only made me angrier. The competition is happening with or without your approval. My game is good, Dad. Maybe you'd know that if you'd spent 5 minutes asking about it instead of already deciding it was a waste of time. The argument ended where these things always did, with my father's immovable authority. I was grounded indefinitely. My laptop was confiscated. The only reason they didn't call the school to pull my entry was the competition had already begun. What none of us expected was the phone call that came the following evening. My father answered, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as he listened. He handed the phone to me wordlessly. Mason Anderson? A woman's crisp voice came through the line. This is Dr. Eliza Harrington from the Massachusetts Technology Development Council. I'm calling because your game entry has caused quite a stir among our judges. My heart thumped painfully. A good stir or a bad stir? Definitively good. In fact, we'd like to offer you one of our young developer scholarships to the summer intensive at MIT. Your narrative architecture and coding solutions are remarkable for someone your age. I glanced at my parents, who were watching with undisguised confusion. Thank you. That sounds amazing. We'll send the details to both you and your teacher, Mr. Kaplan. Congratulations, Mason. We're excited to see where you'll take these skills next. After I hung up, the silence in our kitchen was unlike any that had come before. Not disappointed, not angry, but genuinely stunned. What? My father said carefully. Was that about? I won, I said, still processing it myself. And they've offered me a scholarship to MIT's summer coding program. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. MIT? For coding, I repeated, a strange lightness beginning to replace the weight I'd carried for so long. For the game you thought was a waste of time. For the first time I could remember, my father looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression I'd only ever seen directed at my siblings. It looked almost like respect. The MIT Summer Coding Intensive changed everything. For 8 weeks, I lived in a world where my brain wasn't a liability, but an asset. Where asking why and what if weren't disruptions, but essential tools. Where staying up until 3 a.m. to solve a particularly thorny programming problem wasn't seen as poor self-discipline, but passionate commitment. You've got a unique approach to problem-solving, Mason, Dr. Harrington told me during our mid-program evaluation. You don't follow conventional paths, which sometimes makes your code look messy at first glance, but you find solutions others miss. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, still not entirely used to praise. Is that a good thing? She smiled. In an industry drowning in people who think alike, it's invaluable. The program was housed in a gleaming glass building on MIT's campus, where 60 young coders from across the country converged each day to build increasingly complex projects. Unlike Lakeside, where I'd spent years feeling like a square peg being hammered into a round hole, Here I found myself surrounded by people who operated on similar wavelengths. There was Zach from Seattle, who could visualize entire systems architecture in his head before writing a single line of code. Aisha from Chicago, whose machine learning algorithms were already being studied by graduate students. Tyler from Austin, who spoke 5 programming languages with greater fluency than his native English. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't Mason the screw-up, or Mason the disappointment, or even Mason the black sheep. I was just Mason, the guy building a historical narrative engine that the instructors couldn't stop talking about. "Your family must be incredibly proud," Tyler said one evening as a group of us grabbed pizza near campus. I almost choked on my drink. Not exactly the word I'd use. "But you got into MIT's program," Aisha said, confused. "That's a big deal. My parents practically threw a block party when I got accepted." "Yeah, well, the Andersons have a different metric for success." I tried to keep my tone light. "My brother's in neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. My sister's at Juilliard. MIT summer program is like getting a participation trophy by comparison." My new friends exchanged glances. "That's messed up," Zach said finally. "What you're building is legitimately innovative. Dr. Harrington says, your narrative engine could change how educational games are designed." I shrugged, uncomfortable with both the praise and the scrutiny of my family dynamics. "They're coming around, sort of. At least military school is off the table now." What I didn't admit was how things had shifted at home since the competition win. It wasn't a complete transformation. My parents still frowned at my grades and made pointed comparisons to Ryan's medical school achievements or Melissa's upcoming debut at Carnegie Hall. But there was also something new, a cautious, confused respect, as if they'd discovered an exotic species living in their house and weren't quite sure how to classify it. My father had even asked to see my game one evening, sitting awkwardly at my desk while I walked him through the interface. "So, these historical figures have to make decisions based on modern ethical frameworks?" he asked, brow furrowed as Abraham Lincoln navigated a scenario involving corporate whistleblowing. "That's the basic concept. It forces players to consider how principles translate across time and context." He nodded slowly. "It's thoughtful, more sophisticated than I expected." From my father, this qualified as effusive praise. My mother approached the situation differently, less with direct interest in my coding and more with practical considerations for the future. Dr. Harrington mentioned some universities have begun recruiting directly from this program, she said casually over breakfast one morning. "Have you given any thought to college applications?" It was the first time either of them had discussed my future without the hovering specter of disappointment. Not, if you can get your act together enough for college, but a straightforward assumption that college was now in the cards. MIT would be the obvious choice, I said, watching her reaction. Carefully, their computer science program is top-ranked. MIT, she repeated thoughtfully. Not dismissively, which was a first. We should look into application deadlines and requirements. This tentative new household piece was why I threw myself completely into the final project at the MIT program. A chance to expand my narrative engine into a full educational platform that teachers could customize for different historical periods and ethical frameworks. If I could deliver something truly impressive, maybe this fragile respect would cement into something more permanent. For 4 weeks, I barely slept. My code filled dozens of whiteboards across the lab. I pulled in Aisha to help with the machine learning components and Zach to strengthen the back-end architecture. By the final presentation day, we had a working prototype that allowed users to not just play through historical scenarios, but create their own, with an AI system that adapted the narrative logic based on the historical figures' known positions and writings. When Dr. Harrington saw the completed project, she fell silent for a long moment. "This is graduate-level work, Mason," she said finally. "You've integrated systems that professional developers struggle to connect." "Is it good enough?" I asked. The old Anderson family insecurity surfacing despite myself. Good enough? Mason, we're going to need to bring in some people from the computer science department to see this. And I think Parallax Interactive should take a look as well. Parallax? The gaming company? Dr. Harrington nodded. They've been looking for educational platforms to expand their portfolio. This could be exactly what they need. My heart raced. Parallax was one of the industry's most respected educational technology developers, creating immersive learning environments that actually made kids want to engage with complex material. An introduction to them would be life-changing, Dr. Harrington supplied, apparently reading my expression. Potentially, yes, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Focus on nailing the presentation tomorrow. My parents arrived for the final showcase looking both proud and slightly out of place among the tech-forward crowd. My father had traded his surgeon's precision for uncharacteristic awkwardness, nodding too vigorously at the technical explanations offered by other students' projects. My mother moved more comfortably through the space, her academic background giving her a natural vocabulary for engaging with the instructors. When they reached my station, I took a deep breath and launched into my presentation. This is Chronologic, an adaptive historical narrative engine that uses primary sources and machine learning to create ethical decision frameworks authentic to different time periods. I walked them through a demonstration, showing how Thomas Jefferson navigated scenarios involving modern corporate governance, his responses shifting based on his actual writings about commerce and governmental oversight. The system doesn't just present historical figures with anachronistic problems, I explained. It constructs response pathways based on their documented values and positions. It's educational, but it's also genuinely engaging gameplay. To my surprise, my parents asked thoughtful questions, not the polite, disengaged queries of people waiting for their obligation to end, but genuine curiosity about how the system worked and what its applications could be. This could revolutionize how history is taught, my mother said, educator mode fully engaged. Students struggle to contextualize historical decision-making. This makes it tangible. The ethical framework is particularly interesting, my father added. Medicine faces similar challenges with evolving ethical standards across time. I was explaining how the system could be adapted for medical ethics education when I noticed Dr. Harrington approaching with two people in business attire. Mason, I'd like you to meet Alex Patel and Diane Chen from Parallax Interactive, she said. They're very interested in your platform. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur as I demoed Chronologic again, answering increasingly specific questions about scalability, content creation workflows, and integration potential. By the end, Alex was handing me his business card with a handwritten note for a follow-up meeting. We've been developing an educational division for the past year, he explained. This type of adaptive narrative system is exactly what we've been looking for. We should definitely talk about development possibilities. After they left, my parents stared at me with expressions I'd never seen before, a disorienting mixture of surprise, confusion, and something that looked suspiciously like respect. Did that technology executive just try to recruit you? My father asked. I think so. It didn't feel entirely real yet. Dr. Harrington said they might be interested in licensing the platform. Licensing? My mother's administrator instincts kicked in. Mason, if they're that interested, you need to be careful about intellectual property rights. This is your creation. It was the first time either of them had acknowledged my work as something valuable, something worth protecting. The moment hung between us, fragile and new. The drive home was unlike any post-school event in Anderson family history. Instead of a detailed critique of my performance, my parents discussed potential next steps, legal considerations, and whether we should consult with Ryan's college roommate who'd gone into technology law. MIT would certainly be the right environment to continue developing this, my mother mused. Their entrepreneurship programs are exceptional. Would Parallax want you to suspend college? my father wondered. That would be a significant decision. I sat in the back seat watching them reconstruct their vision of my future in real time. The black sheep suddenly transformed into... what? Not the golden child. That would always be Ryan's role. Not the artistic prodigy. Melissa owned that. Space. But something else. Something that hadn't existed in their framework before. I don't know what happens next, I admitted. This is all moving really fast. My mother turned in her seat to look at me directly. Whatever you decide, Mason, we'll support you. This is clearly where your talents lie. The words I'd waited years to hear. Over the next few weeks, life accelerated to warp speed. Alex Patel arranged a formal meeting at Parallax's Cambridge office, bringing in their development team and legal counsel to discuss potential collaboration models. We see 3 possible paths forward, he explained, as we sat around a sleek conference table that made me acutely aware of my 17-year-old awkwardness. First, we could license the core technology while you maintain ownership. Second, we could offer you a development position to continue building it under our umbrella. Or third, we could discuss acquisition of the platform with appropriate compensation and credit. My father, who had insisted on accompanying me as both guardian and impromptu business advisor, leaned forward. What would these options mean for Mason's education? That's flexible, Diane said. Many of our young developers work part-time while completing their degrees. Some defer college if the project timeline demands it. We believe in supporting educational goals alongside professional development. The meeting ended with a formal letter of intent. Parallax wanted to license Chronologic for an initial sum that made my eyes widen, plus ongoing royalties and a paid internship position that could transition to full-time after graduation. You need to understand what this means, Mason, my father said as we left the building. This isn't just a summer project anymore. This is a professional opportunity with real implications. I know, I said. Though in truth, I was still processing. 6 months ago, I'd been the family disappointment headed for military school. Now, I was fielding industry offers for technology I'd built from scratch. Your mother and I will help however we can, but ultimately, this is your decision. Your creation. Your future. Something in his tone made me stop walking and really look at him. Thomas Anderson, surgeon, perfectionist, perpetually disappointed father, was looking at me not with his usual assessment of my shortcomings, but with genuine respect. Thanks, Dad, I said, the words inadequate for the seismic shift they represented. Senior year transformed into something unrecognizable from the high school experience I'd dreaded for years. With Parallax's backing, Lakeside suddenly discovered remarkable flexibility in their academic requirements. My independent study in computational narrative systems counted for both English and computer science credits. My history grade improved dramatically when my teacher realized I'd built a platform that could transform history education. Even more startling was the shift in how people saw me. Teachers who'd once viewed me as a disruption began asking for my input on how technology could enhance their classes. Classmates who'd dismissed me as the weird underachiever suddenly wanted to discuss startup culture and tech internships. Funny how success changes people's perception, Mr. Kaplan observed dryly during one of our weekly check-ins. Yesterday's troublemaker is today's innovator. It's weird, I admitted. Nothing about me has actually changed. I'm still the same. Person who couldn't sit still in American history. Perspective is everything, he said. Before, they were looking at what you couldn't do. Now they're looking at what you can. What I could do expanded rapidly as the Parallax partnership developed. I spent weekends at their Cambridge office, working alongside professional developers to scale Chronologic for wider educational applications. They assigned me a mentor, Sophia Lin, their lead narrative systems architect, who pushed my coding skills to entirely new levels. You have raw talent, she told me during one particularly grueling debugging session. But talent without discipline is just potential. You need both to build something lasting. The discipline part didn't come naturally. Years of academic rebellion had established some bad habits, but the stakes were different now. This wasn't busy work assigned by teachers who'd already decided I was a lost cause. This was my creation, my future, my chance to build something meaningful. So I learned. I structured my time. I documented my code properly. I collaborated without turning every suggestion into a power struggle. Sophia didn't accept excuses or attitude, but she also respected my unconventional approaches when they worked. Sometimes the messy solution is the innovative one, she acknowledged, after I'd found a particularly elegant workaround for a narrative-branching problem. Just make sure you can explain your reasoning to the next developer who has to work with your code. By winter break, we had a beta version ready for limited classroom testing. Parallax arranged for pilots in 5 Boston-area schools, with plans to expand nationally if the results proved promising. The first implementation day found me standing anxiously at the back of a high school history classroom as 30 sophomores logged into Chronologic for the first time. Your task, their teacher explained, is to guide Frederick Douglass through a modern corporate scenario involving whistleblowing. Consider his actual writings on moral courage and justice as you make decisions. I held my breath as the students began working, waiting for the inevitable technical glitches or engagement problems. But something unexpected happened instead. They got absorbed. Discussions broke out spontaneously about Douglass's principles and how they might apply. Students who'd been slouching in their seats leaned forward, debating different choice pathways. "This is wild," Sophia whispered beside me. "We usually see a 60% engagement rate with new educational tech. This is pushing 90%. When the bell rang, several students actually groaned in disappointment. One boy approached me afterward, having heard, "I was the developer." "That's the first time history class hasn't put me to sleep," he said. "Are you making one for science too? Because chemistry is killing me." The feedback from all 5 test schools followed similar patterns. Teachers reported unprecedented engagement levels. Students retained historical information better when contextualized through the narrative scenarios. Principals asked about licensing costs and implementation timelines. "We need to accelerate the rollout," Alex told me during our end-of-year review. "The market response is exceeding our projections. How do you feel about delaying college for a year to help scale this properly?" The old Mason would have jumped at the chance to skip college altogether. The new Mason had learned enough about the industry to recognize the value of formal education alongside practical experience. "What about a hybrid approach?" I suggested. "I could start at MIT as planned, but work at Parallax part-time. Their co-op program is designed for exactly this situation." Alex nodded approvingly. "That's mature thinking. Let's see if we can make it work." When I brought the proposal home, my parents' response surprised me again. "It's a solid plan," my father said. "Balancing education with professional development. MIT and Parallax are both excellent opportunities," my mother agreed. "Finding a way to pursue both shows good judgment." "So you're okay with it?" I asked, still not entirely accustomed to their approval. They exchanged one of those parental glances that contained an entire conversation. "We're more than okay with it," my mother said finally. "We're proud of you, Mason, not just for the success, but for how you've handled it." Proud. Of me. The words I'd waited my entire life to hear. The following week, a large envelope arrived from MIT with my formal acceptance to their computer science program. My parents insisted on a proper celebration, a family dinner at the same upscale restaurant where we'd celebrated Ryan's medical school acceptance and Melissa's Juilliard scholarship. As we were seated at our table, Ryan, home briefly between hospital rotations, raised his glass. "To Mason," he said, with the confident authority of the firstborn, who found his own path when none of us were smart enough to see it. Melissa smiled. To the family innovator. My mother's eyes glistened slightly. To pursuing passion with purpose. My father cleared his throat, uncharacteristically emotional. To the future you're building. I looked around at their faces, these people who had defined me by my failures for so long, now redefining me by my success, and felt a complex swirl of emotions. Pride, certainly, satisfaction, vindication, but also a quiet, growing realization that while their approval felt good, it no longer defined me. Somewhere along this journey, I'd stopped measuring my worth through the Anderson family yardstick. I raised my own glass. To finding the right pasture, I said, remembering my black sheep metaphor, and to building something bright enough that everyone can see it. My mother tilted her head curiously. What do you mean? I smiled. Just that sometimes the black sheep isn't lost. It's just waiting to find the place where it truly belongs. My first day at MIT felt like stepping into an alternate universe, one where my brain's particular wiring was the norm rather than the exception. Welcome to orientation, said a junior named Ellie who was leading our campus tour. First rule of MIT: if you were the smartest person at your high school, get over it fast. Everyone here is brilliant in their own way, which means nobody is special for being smart. You're special for what you do with it. I glanced around at my fellow freshmen, a global collection of former high school valedictorians, science fair champions, and coding prodigies, all looking simultaneously excited and terrified. For once, I wasn't starting at a disadvantage. My work with Parallax had already established me as someone worth knowing in the computer science department. Anderson, right? A lanky guy with wire-rimmed glasses fell into step beside me as our tour moved toward the main computing labs. Evan Wilson, I saw your chronologic demo at SIGGRAPH last month. The adaptive ethical frameworks are mind-blowing. Thanks, I said, still not entirely used to peer recognition. I'm working on expanding the historical database this semester. Any chance Parallax is hiring more interns? I've got some machine learning experience that might help with your pattern recognition algorithms. By the end of orientation week, I'd collected a circle of collaborators eager to contribute to Chronologic's next development phase. The solitary coder who'd worked alone in Mr. Kaplan's classroom had evolved into something resembling a team leader. My co-op arrangement with Parallax gave me access to their Cambridge offices 3 days a week, where I split time between enhancing the core platform and helping integrate it into their educational product suite. The other 4 days were dedicated to MIT coursework, which proved both challenging and exhilarating in ways high school never had. The difference, I explained to my mother during one of our weekly calls, is that here, the hard parts are actually hard, not just tedious. I'm struggling with computational theory because it's legitimately complex, not because I can't force myself to care about it. That makes sense, she said thoughtfully. You always did better when intellectually challenged rather than just assigned tasks. This new understanding between us still felt fragile sometimes. Years of mutual frustration couldn't dissolve overnight. But we were trying. My parents had begun making genuine efforts to understand my world, just as I'd started making peace with theirs. The real test came when midterm grades were released. Despite my best efforts and genuine interest in my courses, the split focus between MIT and Parallax had taken its toll. My transcript showed a collection of Bs and one particularly painful C+ in advanced algorithms. In the old days, this would have triggered a disappointing lecture about applying myself and living up to the Anderson name. Instead, my father's response was measured. How do you feel about these grades? He asked when I showed him the report during their campus visit. Honestly? Not great, I admitted. The material isn't the problem. I understand it. But I'm stretched, thin between school and Parallax. He nodded, surgeon precise in his assessment. Success requires trade-offs, Mason. If you're excelling at Parallax while maintaining passing grades at one of the world's most demanding universities, that's not failure. That's prioritization. This new vocabulary, one that differentiated between failure and strategic compromise, was revolutionary in Anderson family terms. At Parallax, meanwhile, Chronologic was gaining momentum beyond our initial educational market. A modified version was being evaluated by corporate training divisions at 3 Fortune 500 companies. The historical simulation aspects had caught the attention of museum exhibit designers. There was even preliminary interest from a major entertainment studio about adaptation possibilities. "We need to talk about scaling," Alex said during our quarterly strategy meeting. "You've created something with applications far beyond what we initially projected." The discussion that followed involved terms I'd barely understood a year earlier: venture capital, equity stakes, market penetration strategies. Sophia, my technical mentor, noticed my overwhelmed expression. "Welcome to the business side of innovation," she said during our coffee break. "This is where great ideas either become sustainable or flame out. You need to understand this part as thoroughly as you understand the code." She was right, of course. The technical challenges of building Chronologic had been difficult but comprehensible. The business landscape it now operated in was another kind of challenge entirely. I needed to evolve again. "I'm thinking about adding some business courses next semester," I told my academic advisor the following week. "Maybe even a minor in entrepreneurship." He reviewed my already packed schedule with raised eyebrows. "That would mean either reducing your technical coursework or extending your graduation timeline." "I know. But if I'm going to lead Chronologic's development long-term, I need to understand both sides." The decision to expand my education beyond pure computer science represented another turning point. The rebellious teenager who'd dismissed anything that didn't immediately interest him was giving way to a young adult who recognized the value of comprehensive knowledge. By the end of freshman year, Chronologic had officially spun out from Parallax into its own division with dedicated development resources. My role had evolved into founding technical director, a title that reflected both my original creation and my ongoing leadership while acknowledging I was still learning the executive aspects of the business. "We're assembling a proper management team," Alex explained during the restructuring. "Experienced executives who can handle the operational scaling while you focus on product vision and technical architecture." "You're not pushing me aside?" I asked, the old insecurity briefly surfacing. "Quite the opposite. We're building around you, Mason. This is your brainchild. We're just bringing in the support structure to help it grow properly." The launch party for Chronologic 2.0 coincided with the end of the academic year. Held at Parallax's newly expanded Cambridge headquarters, it brought together educators, developers, investors, and industry partners to celebrate a platform now being implemented in over 200 schools nationwide. My family attended in full force. Ryan flew in from Johns Hopkins, taking a rare break from his neurosurgery residency. Melissa arrived from New York, where she was now performing with the Philharmonic. My parents moved through the crowd with evident pride, no longer confused by the technical discussions around them, but actively engaging in conversations about educational technology and market expansion. "Your brother's application is quite impressive," commented Sophia, watching as Ryan charmed a group of investors with his medical perspective on decision-based learning. "Different field, but same Anderson intelligence." "He's always been the family star," I said automatically, then caught myself. "I mean, he's always been exceptional." Sophia gave me a knowing look. Family dynamics die hard, don't they? But from where I'm standing, this room is full of people who came to see Mason Anderson's innovation, not his brother's. She was right, of course. The event was celebrating my creation, my vision brought to life, yet part of me still carried. That black sheep identity still half expected someone to point out how I didn't quite measure up to the Anderson standard. Later that evening, I found myself alone with my father on the office balcony overlooking the Charles River. He seemed pensive, swirling the scotch he'd barely touched. "I owe you an apology, Mason," he said abruptly. "For what? For not seeing you, not really." He turned to face me directly. "I spent years trying to understand why you couldn't just follow the path that worked for Ryan and Melissa. Why did you have to challenge every expectation, question every rule?" I waited, unsure where this was going. "I kept asking why you couldn't be more like them. I never once considered that maybe you needed to be exactly who you are." He gestured toward the party inside. "This, what you've built, couldn't have come from someone who followed a conventional path. It came from your particular way of seeing the world." The acknowledgement left me momentarily speechless. All those years of feeling measured and found wanting, and now this. "Better late than never," I finally offered. He smiled, a rare, full smile. "Much better. And for what it's worth, I'm extraordinarily proud of the man you're becoming." As meaningful as that moment was, the true test of my transformation came the following week, when I received an unexpected call from Dr. Eliza Harrington, the original MIT program director who had first recognized Chronologic's potential. "I'll get straight to the point, Mason," she said. "Stanford's Center for Educational Technology has approached me about a potential acquisition of Chronologic for their global education initiative. The numbers they're discussing are substantial." My pulse quickened. "How substantial?" She named a figure that made me glad I was sitting down. "That's a lot of zeros." "Indeed. They're prepared to retain you as chief architect with a significant equity stake in the expanded platform. It would mean relocating to California, of course." California. 3,000 miles from Boston. From MIT. From my family and the careful, new balance we'd established. "I need to discuss this with Parallax," I said. "They've invested heavily in Chronologic." "Of course. But ultimately, this is your creation, Mason. Your decision will carry significant weight." The opportunity triggered a whirlwind of meetings, Parallax executives and lawyers debating valuation models and transition structures, MIT advisors discussing transfer options and remote learning possibilities, my parents providing surprisingly balanced counsel about financial implications and career trajectory considerations. "You need to separate the business decision from the personal one," my father advised. "Either path could be correct, depending on your long-term goals." "Stanford has certain advantages for technology development," my mother noted, "but MIT has been a good fit for your learning style." What struck me most was what they weren't saying. There was no pressure to choose based on family expectations or traditional success metrics. They were treating me as an autonomous adult making a complex life decision, not a wayward child needing guidance back to the proper path. After weeks of deliberation and negotiation, I made my decision. Chronologic would partner with Stanford's initiative rather than be acquired outright. I would remain at MIT while taking occasional working sabbaticals to California. Parallax would maintain their implementation role with an expanded development team at both locations. "It's an unorthodox structure," Alex admitted when we finalized the agreements. "But then again, nothing about Chronologic has followed a conventional path. Why start now?" The partnership launched with a joint press conference at Stanford's campus. Standing at the podium between university officials and Parallax executives, I found myself reflecting on the improbable journey from detention-prone teenager to educational technology pioneer. Chronologic began as an attempt to make history personally meaningful, I explained to the assembled press. To help students understand that historical figures face the same types of ethical dilemmas we do today, just in different contexts. The platform has evolved, but that core purpose remains: building bridges between past and present to inform better decision-making. The subsequent media coverage took me by surprise. Technology publications I'd read for years now featured my photo alongside headlines about educational revolution and the future of historical pedagogy. The Boston Globe ran a profile highlighting the local wunderkind reshaping how history was taught. Even the Wall Street Journal included Chronologic in a feature on technologies transforming education. How does it feel to be the family success story? Ryan asked during one of our rare sibling dinners when our schedules aligned. His tone was light, but the question carried the weight of our complicated history. Weird, I admitted. I spent so many years being defined by what I wasn't. It's strange to suddenly be defined by what I am. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. The Anderson curse. We're all measured against impossible standards, even you now, just different ones. Speaking of impossible standards, Ryan said, his surgeons, directness cutting through social niceties. Mom and Dad mention you more than us these days. Mason's partnership with Stanford. Mason's interview in Wired. It's a fascinating reversal. I nearly choked on my drink. That can't be true. Oh, it absolutely is, Melissa confirmed with a laugh. I called home last week after performing at Lincoln Center, and Mom spent 10 minutes asking if I'd seen your segment on Bloomberg Technology. The realization was disorienting. After years of family disappointment, had I somehow become the new benchmark? That's not... I never wanted to replace either of you in their estimation. Ryan's expression softened. We know that, Mason, and we're genuinely proud of you. It's just an interesting shift in the family dynamic. Besides, Melissa added, we had our turns being the golden children. Maybe it's healthy for all of us to experience both sides. As my sophomore year at MIT progressed, Chronologic's implementation continued expanding globally. Educational ministries in Singapore, Finland, and the UK adopted customized versions for their history curricula. Corporate training divisions used adapted models for ethics and decision-making workshops. Museums created interactive exhibits using the narrative engine to bring historical periods to life. The financial implications were equally transformative. My initial licensing arrangement had evolved into an equity position substantial enough to ensure I'd never worry about money again. Royalty payments flowed in from implementations across sectors. Speaking invitations arrived with increasingly generous honoraria attached. For someone who'd grown up in the shadow of established family success, this rapid ascension felt simultaneously validating and surreal. Don't let it change you too much, Sophia advised during one of our regular mentoring sessions. The industry is full of people who struck gold early and let it corrupt their original vision. I'm still the same person, I insisted. She raised a skeptical eyebrow. No one stays the same through this kind of trajectory, Mason. The question isn't whether you'll change, it's whether you'll change intentionally or reactively. Her warning resonated more than I wanted to admit. The demands on my time and attention had increased exponentially. Everyone wanted a piece of Chronologic's success, investors pitching expansion ideas, recruiters dangling lucrative offers, even universities suggesting accelerated graduation paths to free me for full-time commercial development. The Anderson family perfectionism that had once been my nemesis now became a strange ally. The same drive that had made my parents push themselves to excellence now helped me filter opportunities and maintain standards as Chronologic grew. Found myself channeling my father's precision when evaluating technical implementations and my mother's administrative clarity when managing team dynamics. You sound more like your parents every time we talk, Mr. Kaplan observed during one of our check-in calls. The high school teacher who'd first recognized my potential remained a trusted advisor, even as my world expanded far beyond Lakeside. Prep! Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I asked. Neither. It's an interesting thing. He paused thoughtfully. The qualities you once rebelled against are serving you well now that you've integrated them on your own terms. The observation captured something essential about my evolution. I hadn't rejected the Anderson family values so much as I'd needed to discover them through my own path, rather than having them imposed externally. This integration of past and present crystallized during a special event at Lakeside Prep in the spring of my junior year. The school had implemented chronologic across its history department with remarkable results, and they invited me to speak at their annual innovation showcase. Walking those familiar hallways felt like traversing parallel dimensions. The physical, space unchanged, but my relationship to it transformed completely. Teachers who had once sent me to detention now introduced me as our distinguished alumnus. Classrooms where I'd fought against the system now displayed the system I'd created. "We're particularly proud that Chronologic originated right here," the headmaster said during his introduction. "Mason Anderson represents Lakeside's commitment to nurturing unique talents, even when they don't conform to traditional academic patterns." I managed not to visibly react to this wholesale rewriting of history. The Lakeside I'd experienced had been far more interested in conformity than innovation, but perhaps that was changing, thanks partly to the success of their most unexpected graduate. My presentation focused on the development path from rebellious student project to global educational platform, emphasizing the unexpected applications that had emerged along the way. I deliberately avoided the personal narrative. This wasn't about my redemption arc, but about the technology's impact. After the formal presentation, a small group session with the school's computer science students brought me full circle. Sitting in Mr. Kaplan's classroom, now equipped with cutting-edge technology but still bearing his characteristic organized chaos, I faced a new generation of young coders. "Any advice for someone who doesn't fit the traditional academic mold?" asked a girl in the back row, her question cutting through the technical discussion. I considered my response carefully. Find the place where your particular way of thinking is an asset, not a liability. Then work twice as hard as everyone else to build something meaningful there. "But how do you know where that place is?" she persisted. "You don't, always. Sometimes you have to create it yourself." I gestured around the classroom. 6 years ago, I was sitting where you are, convinced I was a failure because I couldn't conform to expectations. But the same pattern recognition that made standardized education challenging for me became my greatest strength when applied to narrative systems architecture. Mr. Kaplan smiled from his position against the wall. "The square peg isn't defective," he added. "It's just looking for a square hole." As the session ended, the headmaster approached with an unexpected proposal. "We're establishing an innovation scholarship in your name, Mason, for students who demonstrate unusual creative potential that might not be captured by traditional metrics." The irony wasn't lost on me. A scholarship named for the student they'd once threatened to expel. "I'd be honored," I said, "on one condition, that Mr. Kaplan has significant input on the selection committee. He sees potential where others often miss it." That evening, I had dinner with my parents at the same upscale restaurant where we'd once celebrated my MIT acceptance. The symmetry felt appropriate for the conversation I needed to have. "I've been offered the Simons Chair in Educational Technology at MIT," I began once we'd ordered. "It's a special appointment that would allow me to complete my degree while leading a research team developing next-generation applications for Chronologic." My mother's eyes widened. "That's a tremendous honor, especially for an undergraduate." "It would mean extending my time at MIT by at least a year," I continued. "The traditional timeline has become complicated given everything else." I waited for the familiar pressure about efficiency and timelines. The Anderson family had always valued direct paths to achievement. Instead, my father nodded thoughtfully. "The opportunity seems worth the adjusted timeline. Your work has moved beyond conventional academic boundaries." The easy acceptance of my unorthodox path still surprised me sometimes. "There's more," I said. "Stanford has countered with a similar position in their computer science department with additional funding for platform development." A beat of silence followed as they absorbed the implications. "That's quite a decision," my father said carefully. "Both institutions offer exceptional opportunities." "We trust your judgment, Mason," my mother added. "You've earned that trust many times over." The words hung in the air between us. a simple acknowledgement that carried the weight of our complicated history. The black sheep had not only found his pasture but had transformed it into something so bright that even those who once looked away couldn't stop staring. And more importantly, they were finally seeing me, not who they'd wanted me to be, but who I actually was. The quiet revolution was complete. 5 years after that pivotal dinner with my parents, I stood at the edge of MIT's Great Dome, watching the sunset paint Cambridge in hues of gold and amber. Below me, workers assembled the stage for tomorrow's commencement ceremony. My commencement ceremony, finally. The path to this moment had been anything but traditional. My undergraduate degree had stretched to nearly 6 years as I balanced academic requirements with chronologic's explosive growth. The Simons Chair appointment had evolved into a unique hybrid position straddling education and industry. My thesis had become the foundation for 3 patents and a forthcoming book on adaptive narrative systems. Penny for your thoughts? I turned to find Evan Wilson, my first MIT friend who had become Chronologic's lead machine learning architect, approaching. With 2 coffee cups. Just reflecting on the improbable journey, I said, accepting the coffee. Tomorrow I graduate. 10 years ago, my parents were threatening to send me to military school. Evan laughed. And now you're giving the student address at MIT's commencement, while running a company valued at 9 figures. Talk about a plot twist. The company was Adaptive Narrative Systems, the independent entity that had emerged when Chronologic outgrew its parallax origins. ANS now employs over 100 people across offices in Cambridge, Palo Alto, and Singapore, developing applications ranging from educational platforms to corporate training systems, to therapeutic tools for psychological healing. The speech is still giving me anxiety, I admitted. Anderson family DNA, I guess. Perfectionism runs deep. Your family is coming? Full contingent. Ryan's flying in from his neurosurgery conference in Tokyo. Melissa's canceling 2 performances with the Philharmonic. My parents are already here micromanaging my apartment cleaning. Evan grinned. The mighty Andersons assembled to witness the black sheep's graduation. He meant it lightheartedly, but the old label still triggered a complex emotional response. Not pain exactly, more like the phantom sensation from a long-healed wound. Not such a black sheep anymore, I mused. More like, I don't know, a specially bred sheep that produces unusually valuable wool? Your metaphor needs work, but I get the point. We watched the sunset in companionable silence for a few minutes before Evan spoke again. Have you decided on the Stanford offer? The Stanford question. Their computer science department had been aggressively recruiting me for a special faculty position that would combine teaching, research, and continued commercial development of ANS technologies. Still weighing options, I hedged. MIT has countered with a similar arrangement. Harvard's thrown their hat in the ring too. Poor Mason, Evan teased. 3 elite universities fighting over you. Such hardship. I nudged his shoulder. Shut up. You know what I mean. It's not about prestige. It's about finding the right ecosystem for the next phase. That evening, my family gathered at my Cambridge apartment for a pre-commencement dinner. The space reflected my evolved aesthetic, clean minimalist furniture offset by walls covered in whiteboards, filled with code architecture and narrative branching diagrams. A far cry from the chaotic teenager's room I'd once inhabited. The view is spectacular, my mother commented, looking out at the Charles River. Though I still don't understand why you keep this place when you have the house in Brookline. The Brookline house, a restored Victorian I'd purchased the previous year, was another symbol of how dramatically my circumstances had changed. The once financially dependent family problem child now owned 2 properties before the age of 30. The apartment is closer to campus, I explained. I still need it for late work nights and meetings. Sensible, my father nodded approvingly. The Thomas Anderson stamp of approval still carried weight, even though I no longer sought it with the same desperate intensity. Ryan arrived with his wife Jessica, a brilliant oncologist he'd met during residency. Melissa followed shortly after with her partner Claire, principal cellist for the Boston Symphony. The Anderson siblings had all found success in our distinct domains: medicine, music, and technology, without the destructive competition that had once defined our relationships. "So tomorrow it's official," Ryan said as we settled around the dining table. "All 3 Anderson children with advanced degrees. Mom and Dad can finally stop worrying about their genetic legacy." "As if that was ever in doubt," my mother said, dryly, though I will admit there were moments with Mason when we questioned our parenting strategies. The candid acknowledgement of our difficult history would have been unthinkable in the old Anderson family dynamic. Now it came with easy affection rather than lingering resentment. "You adapted admirably," I said, raising my glass. Maybe that's where I got my interest in adaptive systems. My father's smile held a hint of wistfulness. "You succeeded not because of our parenting, but often in spite of it, Mason. Let's be honest about that." "I succeeded because eventually we all figured out that different doesn't mean deficient," I countered. "Besides, that early friction helped me develop the resilience I needed for entrepreneurship." Every investor rejection felt mild compared to an Anderson family dinner circa 2010. The laughter around the table carried the comfortable warmth of a family that had grown into a more authentic version of itself. After dinner, while Ryan and Jessica helped with dishes, my father drew me out onto the balcony. His hair had silvered completely in recent years, but his surgeon's posture remained impeccable. "I wanted to give you something before tomorrow's circus," he said, handing me a small box. Inside was his precision watch, the one his father had given him when he finished medical school, the one he'd worn through thousands of surgeries. "Dad, I can't take this. It should go to Ryan. He's the surgeon." My father shook his head firmly. "Ryan will get my surgical instruments. This is for you." "But, Mason." His voice held that familiar note of authority that brooked no argument. "Despite appearances, this watch isn't about medicine. It's about precision, about understanding that timing is everything. In surgery, yes, but also in innovation. You've shown an extraordinary sense of timing with Chronologic, with ANS, with every major decision in your career." I ran my finger over the watch's smooth surface, unexpected emotion tightening my throat. "When my father gave this to me, he said something I didn't fully understand until I saw your work," my father continued. He said, "The best watchmakers don't just measure time. They create new ways to experience it. That's what you've done. With your narrative systems, created new ways for people to experience history, ethics, decision-making. New ways to experience time itself." The parallel left me momentarily speechless. My grandfather, the department store magnate I'd never met, had somehow articulated the essence of work I would do decades later. "Thank you," I managed finally. "This means everything." The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect Massachusetts May weather for an outdoor commencement. As I dressed in my regalia, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and paused. The reflection showed someone both familiar and strange. The same features that had once been arranged in perpetual teenage defiance now composed into something more measured, more intentional. At 30, Mason Anderson had evolved into someone I couldn't have imagined at 17. Not just professionally successful, but emotionally integrated. The rebellious energy channeled into innovation rather than opposition. The questioning nature directed toward solving complex problems rather than creating them. "Looking presidential," Evan commented when I met him before the ceremony. "The perennial troublemaker is all grown up." "Not entirely grown up," I corrected. "Just grown into a better version of trouble." The commencement ceremony unfolded with MIT's characteristic blend of tradition and irreverence. As student speaker, a position I'd been elected to by a graduate community that once would have seemed entirely alien to my high school self, I waited while various dignitaries delivered their addresses. When my turn came, I approached the podium, acutely aware of my family watching from the VIP section, not with their old anxious concern, but with straightforward pride. MIT asks us to question everything, I began, to tear down established systems and rebuild them better, to never accept that's how it's always been done as an answer. For some of us, that approach comes naturally, perhaps too naturally. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. I arrived at MIT as someone who had spent years questioning everything without constructive purpose. The educational system, family expectations, social norms. I challenged them all, but without offering alternatives. MIT taught me that true innovation isn't just about identifying problems. It's about building solutions. I scanned the sea of graduates, brilliant minds from across the globe who had spent years pushing boundaries alongside me. The most valuable lesson I've learned here isn't a technical skill or theoretical framework, though I've gained plenty of both. It's that outlier thinking becomes revolutionary only when channeled into creation, rather than mere criticism. The black sheep can transform the entire flock, but only by producing wool of unprecedented quality and purpose. A glance at my family showed my mother nodding thoughtfully, my father watching with uncharacteristic openness, Ryan and Melissa exchanging amused looks at my sheep metaphor. As we leave MIT today, we carry the responsibility of transforming our questions into contributions, of ensuring that our challenges to existing systems come paired with visions for better ones, of building lives and technologies so compelling that even those who once doubted us cannot look away. The remainder of my address explored the ethical dimensions of technological innovation, the responsibility of creating systems that augment human capability without diminishing human agency. When I concluded, the applause carried that particular MIT enthusiasm, intellectual appreciation layered with irreverent energy. The reception afterward became a microcosm of my converged worlds. Academic advisors discussing research extensions with industry partners. Former classmates who now worked for A&S chatting with potential investors. My family moving through the crowd with the confident ease that had once seemed so unattainable to me. "Impressive speech," commented Dr. Harrington, the original MIT summer program director who had first recognized chronological potential all those years ago. "You've come a remarkable distance, Mason. Thanks to people like you who saw possibility where others saw problems." She smiled. "I simply recognized the pattern. You did the difficult work of transforming it into something meaningful." Later, that afternoon, as the formal celebrations wound down, I found myself sitting with Mr. Kaplan on a bench overlooking the Charles River. My high school teacher had become a dear friend and occasional A&S consultant, helping ensure our educational applications remained grounded in classroom realities. "Full circle moment?" he asked, gesturing toward the MIT dome behind us. "More like a spiral," I reflected, "covering similar territory but at a different level." "That's a good description of healthy growth," he nodded. "The questions remain consistent, but the capacity to address them expands." "Speaking of expansion," I said, "I want to discuss something with you before I make it public." His eyebrows raised with interest. "I've decided to decline the university positions, MIT, Stanford, all of them." "That's unexpected. Everyone assumed you'd take one of the academic appointments." "That's the expected path," I acknowledged. "The prestigious professorships, the research labs, the academic empire building. But I've been thinking about impact scales." "Go on." "Universities reach thousands of exceptional students each year, students who already have access to excellent education. But there are millions who don't. The educational inequality gap keeps widening, especially in technological literacy." Mr. Kaplan nodded slowly. "And you're thinking A&S could address that gap?" "We're establishing the Anderson Educational Access Foundation, using a significant portion of my A&S equity to fund adaptive learning technologies for underserved communities globally. Not just donations, but sustainable implementation models." His expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. That's ambitious and genuinely impactful. It means stepping back from some of the commercial expansion to focus on access and equity issues. The board isn't thrilled about the pivot, but they'll adjust. And your family? The Andersons have always valued traditional markers of success. I smiled. They're evolving too. When I explained the vision to my father, he offered to chair the medical education division. My mother's already drafting implementation, strategies for her former school district. Even Ryan and Melissa are discussing ways to integrate their fields. The Anderson family energy, once directed toward individual achievement and comparison, was finding new expression in collaborative purpose. The announcement of the Anderson Educational Access Foundation made waves across both technological and philanthropic communities. The press coverage framed it various ways: the wunderkind entrepreneur pivoting toward social impact, the tech millionaire giving back, the educational disruptor tackling systemic inequality. None captured the personal dimension that had driven the decision. This wasn't about atoning for success or burnishing a corporate image. It was about completing the transformation that had begun in Mr. Kaplan's classroom, from isolated rebel to connected innovator, from black sheep to shepherd of new possibilities. The Foundation's launch event took place at Lakeside Prep, an intentional choice that acknowledged both where the journey had begun and how far it had traveled. The school that had once barely tolerated me now proudly claimed association with both ANS and the Foundation, their promotional materials conveniently omitting the detention records and disciplinary hearings. We've always strived to nurture diverse learning styles, the current headmaster declared in his opening remarks, triggering knowing looks between Mr. Kaplan and me. My parents hosted a smaller celebration afterward at their Boston home. As family and close friends gathered in the garden, I found myself engaged in conversation with a teenager who looked vaguely familiar. "You're Emma Wright," I realized suddenly. "You won the Mason Anderson Innovation Scholarship last year." She nodded, a flash of surprise crossing her face. "I didn't think you'd remember. There've been 3 recipients now. I remember all of you. Your project on algorithmic bias in educational sorting systems was exceptional. It almost got me expelled," she admitted with a hint of defiance that felt startlingly familiar. The administration didn't appreciate my analysis of their advanced placement criteria. "But Mr. Kaplan advocated for you. He said my troublemaking was actually problem identification, and that I just needed the right channel for it." She glanced at me curiously. "Was that really how it happened for you too?" The question carried echoes of my own younger self, skeptical of easy narratives, allergic to sanitized success stories. "The cleaned-up version says I was a misunderstood genius who just needed the right opportunity," I told her honestly. "The messier truth is that I was both legitimately difficult and legitimately overlooked. Breaking rules without purpose isn't revolutionary, it's just disruptive. But identifying actual problems in existing systems, even when it makes people uncomfortable, that's the foundation of meaningful change." She considered this with serious intensity. The scholarship program mentioned potential internships at ANS for recipients. More than potential. We're counting on it. The Foundation needs exactly the kind of critical perspective you've demonstrated. I handed her my card with personal contact information. "Email me directly when you're ready." As Emma moved away to speak with other guests, my mother appeared at my elbow. "Another recruit for your revolution?" she asked with knowing amusement. "Another black sheep finding her flock," I corrected. "The Foundation needs people who see problems others miss. Like the Andersons have always done," she mused. "Just in different domains." The observation struck me as profoundly true. My father had built his surgical career by identifying overlooked approaches to orthopedic challenges. My mother had transformed educational administration by questioning entrenched practices. Ryan was pioneering neural regeneration techniques that challenged medical orthodoxy. Melissa's compositions broke traditional classical structures to create new emotional landscapes, and I had channeled my particular brand of divergent thinking into systems that helped others see historical and ethical questions from fresh perspectives. Different expressions of the same underlying pattern. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing with my father near the garden's edge. He wore his surgical precision more lightly now, retirement having softened some of his more unyielding edges. "Your grandfather would have approved of the foundation," he said unexpectedly. Behind the business success, he was deeply concerned. With educational access, he just expressed it differently in his era. I never knew that about him. "There's a lot about the Anderson history that got simplified into success narratives," he acknowledged. "The messier parts, the failures, the conflicts, the divergent paths, those got edited out over time. Perhaps that was a mistake." I thought about how completely my own narrative had transformed, from family failure to unexpected success, from rejected rebel to celebrated innovator. "Stories need both light and shadow," I said. "That's what makes them dimensional." My father nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother and I spent years trying to help you fit a particular story we'd written for. The Anderson family? We couldn't see that you were writing a more interesting chapter. And now that chapter influences how the entire story continues," I observed. "The foundation represents all of us now, not just my work. As it should. You may have started as the family black sheep mason, but you've become something else entirely." "What's that?" His expression held a mixture of pride, wonder, and something like amused surrender. "A light so bright the rest of us now navigate by it." The metaphor settled between us, not with the weight of expectations that had once defined our relationship, but with the comfortable recognition of truth. I had indeed built a life so bright they couldn't stop staring. But somewhere along the way, the point had shifted from proving my worth to illuminating new possibilities, not just for myself, but for an expanding circle that now included family, colleagues, and students around the world. The black sheep had found not just acceptance, but purpose, and in doing so, had transformed the very meaning of the flock. 2 weeks after the foundation launch, I found myself back on MIT's campus for a meeting with potential university partners. Crossing the familiar courtyard, I spotted a student sitting, alone, furiously coding on a laptop plastered with stickers that loudly proclaimed various technological and political positions. Something in his focused intensity and barely contained energy resonated with memory. I paused, watching as he muttered to himself while attacking the keyboard with obvious frustration. "Algorithm problem?" I asked, approaching casually. He glanced up with the harried expression of someone deeply enmeshed in a technical challenge. "Narrative branching issue. The complexity scales exponentially with each decision node." I smiled. "Mind if I take a look?" His expression registered mild annoyance at the interruption, then reluctant curiosity. "You know something about narrative systems?" "A little," I said, sitting down beside him. "I'm Mason Anderson." His eyes widened with recognition. "Holy shit, you're just another coder who once sat right where you are, struggling with similar problems," I interrupted gently. "Now show me what you're working on." As he began explaining his project, a narrative engine for climate change education that incorporated real-time data, I felt the circle completing itself again. Not an ending, but another turn in the spiral. Another black sheep finding his way, another divergent thinker creating new possibilities. The story continued. 10 years after launching the Anderson Educational Access Foundation, I stood on stage at the Global Education Summit in Geneva, surveying an audience filled with educators, technologists, and policymakers from across the world. "The question I'm asked most frequently," I began, "is whether I ever imagined this outcome when I was coding alone in a high school computer lab." The audience chuckled, Familiar with the origin story that had become almost mythological in educational technology circles? The honest answer is no. I wasn't building toward a global foundation or a revolution in adaptive learning. I was simply creating something that made sense to my particular brain, a system that approached historical narrative the way I naturally processed information. Behind me, statistics displayed the foundation's impact. 5 million students across 43 countries, over 500 customized implementations for different cultural and educational contexts, measurable improvements in engagement, retention, and critical thinking skills, particularly among students who struggled in traditional learning environments. The most powerful innovation often emerges not from those at the center of systems, but from those at the margins, the ones who see problems others have normalized, who question approaches others take for granted. In the front row sat my family, my parents, now in their 70s but still actively involved in the foundation. Ryan, whose neurosurgery techniques had revolutionized spinal cord treatments. Melissa, whose music education initiative had brought classical training to underserved communities. And an extended circle of partners, children, and collaborators who formed our expanded clan. My journey from family black sheep to educational innovator isn't unique. Throughout history, transformative thinking has often come from those who didn't quite fit established paradigms. The challenge for educational systems isn't just identifying these divergent thinkers, but creating spaces where their unique perspectives become strengths rather than liabilities. After the presentation, a young woman approached me, Emma Wright, now the Foundation's Director of Algorithmic Fairness. Her teenage defiance matured into focused purpose. "Your parents are sharing your childhood report cards with the Kenyan delegation," she informed me with amused exasperation. "Your mother seems particularly fond of the one that says, 'Mason shows potential if he would only apply himself appropriately.'" I laughed. Perfect. Let them see the real story, not the polished myth. That evening, our family gathered for dinner at a small local restaurant. 4 generations of Andersons around one table. My nieces and nephews mixed with Emma's children and other foundation families, the distinction between blood relations and chosen connections long since blurred. My father raised his glass for a toast. His surgeon's hands now slightly trembled with age, but his voice remained strong. "To asking difficult questions," he began. "And building unexpected answers," my mother continued. "To pathways that don't appear on any map," added Melissa. "And destinations worth the detour," Ryan concluded. I looked around at this extraordinary gathering, this family that had evolved from rigid expectations to expansive acceptance, this work that had grown from personal rebellion to global impact, this life that had transformed from isolation to profound connection. "To black sheep everywhere," I said, raising my own glass. "May they all find the right pasture, and may they build lives so extraordinary that the whole world can't help but stare." The legacy wasn't just in the technology or the foundation or even the educational transformation. It was in this new story we'd written together, one where difference wasn't deficit, but potential, where rejection became redirection, and where the outsider ultimately created new spaces of belonging. Not despite being the black sheep, but because of it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.